Hey everybody! So I just wanted to make another clarification video. There was another one of those tutorials a week or so ago that from the ones I've graded and questions I received. It certainly seemed like too much information, and the core concept, the actual important part from it, is a very important one. So I wanted to make sure and cover it or clarify that, and hopefully dig through that too much information that was confusing people. And that was the section about APIs. There was a lot there, a long description of them, starting to get technical. And we want those technical definitions, but we also don't want to lose sight of the basic idea of what it is. An API just means we're requesting data from a server. That's it. For a quick example, if we go to Google and search for funny pet videos, the standard example I use, we get back these results. But what's important for us up here in the URL is how Google searched for that. You'll see up here at the beginning, we have that website we started with, but then we added more stuff on there. Added something called search, and then a question mark, and that question mark will be important for us. I like to think of it as a hook. We can see from the shape that we're going to hook some stuff onto this URL. In particular, we've got a data field that's been assigned funny cat videos. And the ampersand means the rest of this is the results we get from that. But that first part, that's what an API is. We ask a server for some data. And the server recognized our request and responded with a bunch of data. So hopefully you can see quickly that that's a very important concept. In that video, he went through the technical stuff on it and then jumped over into all the Python, bunch of different Python modules, mixing things together. He was using Flask, which is a somewhat popular one. For the clarification, I was just going to throw it in a API in Django to see the core parts, because we've already seen a couple Django videos in a row. So instead of trying to clarify stuff about Flask, I'm just going to throw those key concepts that we need from that into what we've been looking at the past couple of videos. Also threw some links on here. I taught SDEV 220 in a Learn Anywhere format in the spring, so here are some videos from that. Every time I make a video in the class, I make it a point to try and speak slowly and clearly, so you should be okay to watch it at an increased speed, pause it, and in the classroom for software development classes, I just kind of do follow along examples. On my way through school and all the programming classes, I would always try to follow along similar to the teacher. So slight differences, change it up just enough to confirm that I understood the concepts and it wasn't an exact copy and paste, and didn't really understand anything except the exact letters on there. And I always tried to change it up a little to make sure it made sense. But here's some videos from when I covered data in the old course. This was the old course shell, so things are in a different order, and there were quite a few different things. But we covered this in the section on writing files, and well, to write it to a file, we just turned it into a string, and once we have it as a string, it doesn't really matter what we do with it. They only talk about JSON. Anytime I make an API, I try to do all three of these. CSV, comma separated variables, that's the file type that eventually grew into spreadsheets. So those are what opens with a spreadsheet, and most people in our modern world know how to work with spreadsheets, so that's a good form to give people data in. JSON is a lot like a Python dictionary. If we looked at it, we look at the printout from it, they look very similar. The big difference is, well, if Python maybe went to a kindergarten class and got its report card, that report card would say, does not play well with others. Everything about Python, and the reason we use it, everything about it is designed to be easier for the human. And all that extra work is passed on to the machine. So Python data types like strings are not our Unicode type strings. The integers in Python are nothing like what you learned when you first heard about binary code, probably the first lecture on binary code where you're learning what those numbers mean. but in JSON they are. And as far as differences, we don't hit a difference between Python dictionaries and JSON until we get to where we pass functions, except for that file type. And JSON is just, if we have a string, it'll be Unicode. And if we have an integer, it's going to be that most basic type of integer that you probably learned about on the first binary lecture you had. Just regular binary representation of integers and floating point numbers. So that's the one that works well with everything. That kind of uses our standards everywhere. XML, it's a markup language, so it's a really, really good format for the computer, which lots of different aspects of efficiency, but the one we care about is it will be faster, because it's a markup language, so every piece of data has the start tag and the end tag. So each piece of data has its starting point, any metadata about it, the actual data, and the endpoint. So it's almost the ideal form for the machine. Obviously, the ideal form for the machine would be binary code, but when we feed binary code into a machine to work with, that's going to be in the order of start point, metadata, actual data, endpoint. The same thing we get in markup languages. So when our data sets get big, we can buy back time that we lose from the big data set with a markup language. And some other things, it's not a coincidence, for those who have seen C family language, it's not a coincidence that our tags in markup language are the same symbol for generics and other languages. But we don't have generics in Python, so that would be a side note. So here's some videos I probably should have shared already. Probably could have shared that playlist already. This from when I taught it in the spring, if you want to watch those. And there is a library about JSON. I don't know why he didn't use that in the video. And to clear up the API stuff, I'm just going to do something quick in Django with the core concept, because what we need is what an API is. And that is just requesting data from a server. So to try and clarify it a little more, I'm just going to go to a server and skip all those virtual environments and things like that. So the last video we set up that Python Anywhere account. So I'll just go in here and use the site we used for this. Go back to files, and in my site is where we have this deploy one. I could open the bash console and do manage.py space start app and create a new one. I'm just going to add another page here. Seems like probably the quickest way to get there. So here's some stuff on a server. So bypassing all of that extra things about setting up a server and working a virtual server and working in the command prompt and the particular modules we're using, and there are lots and lots and lots of Python modules to work with APIs. Flask is not the only one. There are lots and lots of them out there. So what we really need is the core idea of what an API is. Django will also work for it, because Django runs on a server, and well, if an API is just asking a server for some data, then we can do that here. And those other, the get, post, put, delete, those are the things the server can do. I always like the restaurant analogy of a server, because the client server for computer architecture is very, very similar to the client server architecture in a restaurant. When you go to a restaurant, sit down at a table, and the server comes over and maybe you tell the server that you want a steak and a margarita. The server is not going to make either one of those themselves. The server in the restaurant, she's not the one that makes steaks, or he. They're not the one that makes the drinks. The server in the restaurant is the one that knows how to ask the bartender for a margarita and how to ask the kitchen staff for a steak. And when they're finished, brings them back to you. So a computer server does the same thing. It's the one that knows how to answer those questions. And we, as programmers, we have to prepare the answers to those questions. So let's just add another site here on the URLs one. We'll use the actual server instead of a virtual server to hopefully make a few clarification points here. So if we open up the URLs, we can edit it right here, but we just need another path. So I'm going to add some stuff to this. We'll make another path And probably could have thought of a name beforehand. I'm just going to call it some API. Oh, and that in a slash just for good form. And I'll have that open the views.someAPI method, which we're getting ready to write. And that way we're not necessarily learning new things. So same thing we've done before. We're just going to put our stuff in a method in the views.py script, and then we'll access it from some API in the URL. So save that, come back up here, and jump over in views. And so I'll make that other one. So define some API, and it's a Django method, so it's going to get the request that comes in on the URL, so we can pull some stuff from that. I'll call it URL query because that's really what it is. And that's going to be request, and any of those we have, get, post, delete. I'll just use get. Get, we can actually see it in the URL, so obviously that's the one we want to use here. So we can just type stuff into the URL, and on the get request that comes in, we want to get something. I'll call it stuff. On those query results earlier, we saw Google just calls it Q, but we need a data field to put our query into. So we'll grab all that, and that's the API request. So then we just need to fill that request. So to fill the request, we'll need some data. And that was another one with the too much information. They included data, a special version of SQLite to work in there, the SQL alchemy. I've always called that SQL alchemy. But it led to way too much information in that video. So I'm just going to put some data right here. I'm just going to make a list. Some data equals a list. And, oops, whenever I'm in the classroom, I have sort of a standard that I put together for classroom examples, just name, age, and town. So we can do a couple name, age, and town things. So like maybe somebody named Sally, who's 23 years old and lives in the town of Salem. It's one of our data points. Another one might be somebody named Carrie, who's 38 and lives in the town of Carmel, which I might have spelled wrong. I think I spelled like the candy. The city up by Indy might have an A in it. Sorry, I don't live near Indy. About once or twice a year I see that sign. The sign for the town. Sorry if I spelled your town name wrong. Well, I was talking about Indy, so maybe Ida, who's 62, lives in Indy. What else? Gary, who's 17, lives in Gary. Wayne, who's 23, another 23-year-old, lives in Fort Wayne. So that's probably a good little data set for us. We'd probably have that on a database or something more advanced, and that video jumped right to it, but we have some data. And the API is a request is going to be made for the data our server knows about. For the restaurant analogy, the data we have here is like the bartender and the kitchen staff. And when we show up to the restaurant to order stuff, our server knows about the bartender and the kitchen staff, and will get us the stuff that we order. So that's why an API is very important. So we don't want to get the core concept lost in too much information. Try to keep this video short. I'm just going to look for all of them. So if URL query is equal to the word all, then we'll put together a dictionary and turn that dictionary into a JSON object, which is really, really easy. We'll see that in a second, and then send it back to our page using one we've already seen. So hopefully stuff that looks familiar. So since this is all, I'll just loop through the whole thing for I and D and N, enumerate some data. We'll say that result, we'll turn that I into a key. Just use integer keys because that's a quick, easy way to do that. And then it's going to have some name data because we want it a little bit better than a list form. We want those fields, not indices, because it's much easier to work with a string than a bunch of numbers. The name is going to be D, our data. So enumerate, the counting things is I, and D is the list. So D0, then an age field is going to be D1, and a town field will be D2. We'll close that off, and then we're putting small dictionaries into that dictionary. And I said earlier, a Python dictionary and a JSON object, if we just look at them, are going to look the same until we get to passing functions. But Python dictionaries don't work well with things that aren't Python. So we want to turn that into JSON, which is actually really easy. We'll do a couple imports here. I'll come up to the top. We can import anywhere. We usually do it at the top just for good form. So we also saw Django.http where we just send back a string, import HTTP response, which should make sense, right? We get an API request and we send an HTTP response to fill that API request. Those names go together. That's how we ask and receive things from a server. So if we have this, we'll return our HTTP response object, which we could send it back and it'll print, but I want to go ahead and show this. There's also import JSON, which is in that video that I'm going to link to from the spring, just in the string. That'll be a string. We did it in the text file section, but kind of the same thing. That has a method called dumps, json.dumps, and we just pass in a Python dictionary, and that spits out a JSON object. So it turns like these names into Unicode, the strings into Unicode, and the Python integers into normal, most basic fundamental binary integers. What else can I do? Otherwise, I'll just send back a message. Return HTTP response, invalid data request. And obviously on things that weren't a short example, you probably have a whole bunch of else ifs or elifs to sort through the data. But that's all it is. We're asking a server for data, and the server's going to send that back. Hopefully I didn't make a typo there, but I was talking and typing the whole time I was talking. I was typing the whole time I was talking, so there's probably a good chance of it. Come back up here where we can get over to the web button, reload our page, and open this up. Give it a... Okay, so there's the top level. So / deploy is the Django section. And then / home's the one we did the other day. This time we want some API. Oh, invalid data request because we didn't put any on. So we need to add a data request to it. So that some API page should have something hooked on. So our question mark looks like a hook. We're going to hook something on. And what we want to hook on is we said we're looking for stuff. I'll point at the code. Now that page is open. On my site, and deploy, and views.py, we said we're expecting something as a GET request, so it's human readable in the address bar. There should be a data field called stuff that has been assigned a value. So we're going to say stuff equals all in this case. And we're typing in an address bar, so everything here is a string. So when it gets over here, we need to make sure, be aware it's coming in as a string. And here the quotes are implied, I guess. There we go. Something went wrong. I was expecting more than just one data field. Oh, I think I see what went wrong. That key was supposed to be an integer. Oh. I didn't want to type I every time. I wanted to turn I into a string. Let's try that. Save that. And the server's going to keep looking at the old version until we tell it to send the new version. Changes are finished, so tell the server to look at the new version. Whenever it gets around to it, there we go. And we should be able to reload that. There's our data. So that's what an API is. And then anytime we need it, we can just send this from any software we have, as long as it has a connection to the internet, which most software in our modern world is going to have a connection to the internet. We can send this URL to that server, and that server will respond with this data. That's what an API is, and then we can use it in mobile apps or desktop applications, or anything that can connect to the internet can now ask this server for this data. So a very important concept. Hopefully that clarified it a little. Everything else was just some popular libraries to work with. He never used the JSON library. I'm not sure why. I was out of the code. Well, I covered it in this video. For those other things, you can kind of look into this. Anytime I write an API, I usually try to go ahead and include all three of them because it doesn't take much. Just we're building up a string, so you can, even instead of using an internal library, you can just add a bunch of, concatenate on a bunch of tags to the data and make the XML file yourself. The CSV file is just the string as a string with commas in between them. And then we just looked at JSON. But I'll include those videos in the announcement. Hopefully that helped to clarify what an API was, because that's a very important thing, and we don't want to lose something very important behind too much information shoved into a 45-minute video or 50-minute video, however long that was. Hopefully that clarified some stuff. I think I'm just going to start making videos on a regular basis each week. Go ahead and expect some short videos trying to clarify things. Obviously, you'll still want to watch the tutorials and stuff, because I'm going to squeeze the key concepts into short videos to help clarify. And yeah, I'll see y'all in the next video. If you have any questions about that, let me know. The core concept of API is very important, so I wanted to make sure that was very clear what is going on with that. And I'll see you all soon.